All right, welcome. So I've got a fan blasting at me. Hopefully you can't hear it. I tested it. Sounds like you can't hear it, but I apologize if there's a humming sound or anything like that, because I'm going to try to explain what I think is an important and not very well understood concept in aesthetics. It's a bit tricky to explain, so this is going to be kind of a first try at explaining this, hopeful and explaining it in a way that will hopefully be understandable to people in general and maybe help you appreciate art in a different way. So what I'm going to be talking about, of course, is qualitative binding, which sounds like, what is that? Well, I'm going to argue it's a central, or should be a central concept in aesthetics. It's not something I thought too much about until recently. We have kind of vague notions about what makes an artwork and what unifies a piece of art. If we think that unity and unification is even an important concept in art, when I think it is. There's things to say about disunity. That's an important aspect too. But I think even disunity, disjuncture, things like that take place within a broader context of unity. So let me see if I can get at this concept. So have you ever had the experience of reading a novel, hearing a piece of music, watching a film that changed how you felt about the world, that transformed your sense of reality in some way? And why is it that some works of art, maybe a piece of music, a poem, a novel, a painting, why is it that some works of art seem to leave a strong impression on you that colors your experience afterward? There's various answers to this question, I think, and various parts of the answer, but I think one important piece of the puzzle that I'm going to try to address today, one important piece of the puzzle is what some aesthetic theorists have called quality. So we're not talking here about quality in the sense of good or bad, like this is quality art. This is a piece of quality art. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something more elusive, something that binds together the disparate elements of a composition. Pitches, for example, in music, you've got all these pitches, rhythms, things like that, timbres, all of that stuff. Colors, lines in painting, words in literature, sentences, images in film. So we're talking about something that binds all these things together into a single object, an object which yields or affords a coherent kind of experience. So quality, as I'm going to talk about it, is that something, that elusive something that binds together these different bits and pieces, the pitches and colors and words and lines and all of that. So the concept of quality in this sense is qualitative binding that we're going to be talking about. It's one of the most subtle and I think overlooked concepts in aesthetics. And I'm borrowing the term, I can change the page here, borrowing the term qualitative binding from the literary critic Nicholas Gaskell, who used it while discussing the aesthetics of John Dewey, who, as you know, I'm a big fan of. But qualitative binding has also been discussed by various other thinkers, and I'll mention some of them, including the English critic John Middleton Murry and the American philosopher Susanne Langer. Other terms have been used besides quality, and we'll talk about some of those. We'll go over some of those as well. So I want to talk about Dewey first. So Dewey's view of quality. So according to Dewey, a successful work of art evokes a certain quality, and this quality pervades and unifies all the details of the work of art. And to have a genuine aesthetic experience is to have your experience in turn pervaded by the work's fundamental quality. to have your organic bodily responses organized by that special quality. And actually, real world situations are also distinguishable because of their different qualities. But aesthetic experience is distinguishable from practical experience by basically by not having ends beyond that experience. I've talked about the concept of aesthetic experience in other places. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that here, but it's kind of like qualitative apprehension for the sake of qualitative apprehension, rather than for the sake of, guiding your attempt to solve some practical problem. In practical life, quality just kind of emerges through our interaction with our surroundings. But the problem of art is that the artist has to find a way of capturing and conveying the specific quality that has caught their interest. So we develop maybe a quality to our experience through our habits of interaction. And artists, I think, are sensitive to the qualities of experience, and they may want to try to capture that quality in a piece of art, in a novel, in a painting, musical composition, whatever. And so the problem of art is how to do that. Any case, when we talk about qualitative binding, we're talking about the creation or suggestion or evocation of a quality which binds. It's going to bind together the various aspects or details of a work of art. So what is this quality? I'll move myself. I don't think I will be blocking your view, but I'm kind of blocking my view, so I'm going to move myself. I wonder if I can switch to the, not easily. So anyway, let's start by clearing up a possible confusion here. When philosophers talk about qualities, this word quality has many different meanings. And when philosophers talk about qualities, they're often thinking about the qualities of objects that have been traditionally divided into primary qualities and secondary qualities. This is a philosophical term of art: primary quality, secondary quality. Primary qualities are things like solidity, size, weight, extension, motion, number, figure, right? For us pragmatists, I should say, for pragmatists like me, primary qualities are those that are amenable to discovery through manual touch and grasping. I tend to say that they're handleable, right? You can feel the solidity of something, or the size, the weight, how it extends, if it's moving, right? You can also see motion, of course, but I think basically it comes from our manual experience. So that's primary qualities. Secondary qualities are things like color, taste, smell, sound. Philosophers of mind also call these qualia. When philosophers talk about qualia, they tend to be talking about secondary qualities. Also sometimes what I'm going to call tertiary qualities, which you can think of for now as emotions. So sometimes those can be qualia too, like pain is a classic example, but color is also kind of a classic example of a quale, or a smell or a taste, whatever. For pragmatists, these secondary qualities are non-handleable, right? They're more a product of distance perception, although arguably taste is more of a contact perception. But in any case, kind of the paradigmatic examples of secondary qualities are things like color and sound, I would say. And those are distance, aspects of distance perception. They're not handleable. You can't touch a color. You can't touch a sound. You can't grab a smell, and so on. So when I'm talking about quality here, I'm actually not going to be talking about primary qualities or secondary qualities. That's not what quality is going to mean here. So yet another way of using quality is what are sometimes called tertiary qualities. So tertiary qualities, Dewey, well, they've also been called states of mind. Dewey has an essay called States of Mind where he tries to get at, what does this mean? What do we want to mean by this concept, by this term, state of mind? You can think of it in that sense, state of mind. Dewey has also occasionally called tertiary quality in this sense a sense of life, maybe a sense of experience, something like that. Or a primary emotion. We'll talk about primary emotions later on. So you can think of it also as a mood, would be another kind of common term that you might apply here. Some people differentiate between moods and emotions. Later on, I'll distinguish between primary emotions and secondary emotions in a similar way. So, and we'll see various other terms as well. People have tried to come up with various terms to kind of get at this really difficult to point to concept that I'm trying to talk about here. So now, before I attempt to define quality in this tertiary, sense of life kind of way, it may be helpful to refer to a distinction among different kinds of words made by the philosopher, not very well-known philosopher, Scudder Clyce. That's right, Scudder Clyce, somewhat of an influence on Dewey. And in his book, Universe, the book called Universe, again, a very pretty obscure book. I only know him, or I discovered him through occasional references from Dewey's work, in Dewey's work. So in the book Universe, Clyce distinguishes between three kinds of words: one words, many words, and relationship words. So one words refer to positive and negative wholes. So you have things like universe, right? Talking about the whole of existence, infinity, everything, totality, nothing, zero, right? So empty, kind of emptiness. Even experience, kind of experience as what we live within constantly. Situation. So talking about the situation as a whole. Nature, right? Nature, kind of maybe another word for universe in some contexts. And then many words refer to parts or aspects within those wholes, if there are any. Obviously, with nothing, there's no parts to it. I don't know, maybe some physicists would want to disagree with that. But in the kind of the traditional philosophical sense, nothingness has no parts. But if there are parts, we can talk about them in various ways. So I mentioned primary and secondary qualities. So those could be things like green, red, hot, cold, smooth, rough. The primary and secondary qualities are many words. Objects would be other kinds of many words. Objects, table, person, rock. I have table on there twice for some reason. I think one of them should say rock. Oh, well. You know what I mean. Tree, person, thought, maybe emotion in some contexts. And then we have relationship words. So relationship words are used to return parts into the wholes from which they have been analyzed. So we begin with wholes, and then as it becomes necessary, we break them into parts. So what are the parts that I need to take account of in this situation? And then relationship words are how we put those parts back together again, kind of like Humpty Dumpty, although he didn't get put back together again, really. But and we can't really build a whole out of a bunch of parts. That's a whole other conversation. There's stuff left over. Anyway, we use relationship words to tie things back together again. So those could be things, are some of the feeling words. Feeling words like love, hate, anxiety, tranquility, or feeling itself. Meaning, words like meaning, significance, value, right? We attempt to use those to kind of talk about kind of the place of parts within wholes, right? We're pointing to kind of the importance of something in the whole, make it part again of a whole, not just an isolated thing. So relationship words. At the risk of really confusing things, well, let's see. Oh yeah, so I wanted to mention that, so context matters also, right? So some of these words could be in different parts of this list, depending on how you use them, right? Nature could be kind of everything, or it could just be like the natural world, part of the universe. And this is true, especially, I think, of these feeling words on the right side there, on these kind of relationship feeling words. So sometimes those can be we call these tertiary qualities, right? So primary qualities, those handleable things. Secondary qualities, usually things we observe in the world through distance perception, color, sound, and so on. Tertiary qualities, like how we feel about those things. And those can be many words, or they can be relationship words. So, yeah, this will maybe be confusing, but also maybe illuminating in another way, that you can talk about primary tertiary qualities and secondary tertiary qualities. Another way to say this is primary and secondary emotions, which is what I'll use later. But, if you're thinking about tertiary qualities, kind of these feeling words that we have about the stuff in the world, the situations that we're in, there's a sense in which in which a tertiary quality pervades the whole situation, but also there's more limited emotions within a situation. So you can think of primary tertiary qualities and secondary tertiary qualities, although that's a very kind of ugly way to speak. Yeah, but let's first consider them as primary tertiary qualities, as kind of pervasive feelings, as maybe a sense of tranquility, or even anxiety, or of meaningfulness, or something like that. These sense of life qualities are best seen as relationship words, I think. So quality in this sense is a word that points to a kind of glue in experience, something that binds together parts into wholes. Binding together parts into a whole experience, into a kind of unified experience, making an experience. If situation, the word situation, is seen as a one word, each situation, we can say, has its own quality, its own pervasive quality that ties it together into an experienced situation. Well, instead of a quality of this or that object within a situation, we can talk about the situational quality itself as the emotional glue that makes a situation a kind of a setting for a particular kind of experience. Quality in this sense can be explained as a sort of feeling or mood, as we've already talked about. Dewey in Art and Experience simply refers to this glue as emotion. So he wrote, I'll quote him a little bit, emotion is the moving and cementing force. Moving and cementing. So it kind of motivates us and also ties the behavior and experience together. It selects what is congruous and dyes what is selected with its color, thereby giving qualitative unity to materials externally disparate and dissimilar. It thus provides unity in and through the varied parts of an experience. I think that's a very good way of putting it, right? It puts together congruous things, gives things qualitative unity, dyes them with its particular quality or color, right? Unifies externally disparate things and dissimilar things. Let's look at an example. Maybe an example will be helpful. So Dewey, also in Art and Experience, cites a portion of a letter by Vincent van Gogh to his brother. Van Gogh writes, I have a view of the Rhone, the iron bridge at Tranctaille, in which the sky and the river are the color of absinthe, the quays a shade of lilac, the figures leaning on their elbows on the parapet, blackish, the iron bridge an intense blue, with a note of vivid orange in the blue background and a note of intense malachite green. The notice here actually that he's talking about secondary qualities in this first part. He's kind of describing what he did in the painting using secondary qualities, which are, of course, the basic stuff of painting. He goes on, another very crude effort, and yet I am trying to get at something utterly heartbroken and therefore utterly heartbreaking. So we switched into tertiary qualities, right? That's really interesting. So we started out talking about the secondary qualities of the painting, and he kind of switched into the tertiary qualities that he's trying to portray and create in the viewer. So Van Gogh was describing how he'd painted something from his experience. The bridge at Tranctaille. Hard for me to say that word. French. Some French words are really hard to say if you're not French or haven't spent a lot of time studying French. But in any case, that if the painting were successful, so if the painting was successful according to Van Gogh, according to his intention, it would be suffused, pervaded by the quality of heartbrokenness, which would be conveyed, be transferred to the viewer. This was the sense of life, the cementing force that was supposed to bind together the many elements of the painting, the absinthe sky and river, the lilac quays, the blackish parapet, and so on and so forth. These would not be individual pieces added or juxtaposed together, but distinguishable elements of a qualitatively united whole, a qualitatively unified, united whole. Van Gogh's goal, the goal of Van Gogh, was qualitative unification, something, as he says, something utterly heartbroken and therefore utterly heartbreaking. Looking at the painting now, I couldn't really say whether or not it's heartbreaking. Of course, such qualities are difficult to convey. That's part of the point of this talk. So the painting hangs together as a whole, at least in terms of the palette. I think there's a nice, well, I don't know. It's not my favorite Van Gogh painting. I have some issues with it, with the composition. I'm not sure exactly how I would describe the quality that I get from it. I don't like the left side, to be honest. I don't like the left side of the painting that much. Hopefully this shouldn't get switched in the video. Yeah, there's parts I like. I get kind of a strong kind of dusky feeling from the upper, what would we say, like the northeast section of it. I don't know. But so yeah, maybe it's not totally successful. He said it was crude, right? So maybe we can accept his self-analysis here. On the other hand, though, there are other paintings from this period of Van Gogh's work that strike me as more clearly, qualitatively heartbroken. We'll look at a few. So here's one. I think a nice painting, more qualitatively whole, I think. Maybe a somewhat better composition, more simplified composition, more simplified palette. This one I like quite a lot too, from the same year. And I want to talk about one more at least. So again, somewhat more simplified. I think the composition is better. Also this one. So, yeah, so notice the bleaker palettes of the last three paintings that I showed, and consider the isolation and the distance of the figures, which point maybe to the isolation of the viewer and the artist even, right? Van Gogh is looking at this from a certain distance, a separation from life, maybe. So when we look at this painting, for example, the railway bridge, we seem to be looking on life from afar with a certain desolateness, kind of a bleakness, maybe. There's space, a lot of space here, space between the figures in the painting, space between the viewer and those figures. There's a stronger, I think, a stronger sense of quality, more of that heartbrokenness that Van Gogh was trying to convey maybe in this period. And at least he was trying to convey in that first painting I showed, maybe unsuccessfully, and maybe more successfully in some of these slightly later paintings later from that same year. So yeah, quality. Quality, as we're talking about it here, is a relationship word, this heartbrokenness, a relationship word which points us to the wholeness of a whole, the emotional core that binds it into an experience. And here I'm treating an artwork as a kind of whole, a temporary or proximate whole, an experiential universe, a kind of small universe for us to have an experience in. Just as a situation in practical life is a temporary whole that you need to deal with. You may be anticipating other situations, but you can only really deal with one qualitative situation at a time, right? Life tends to come to us a situation at a time. Of course, situations can interrupt each other, but I can't really teach a class and commute to work and play with my son and eat dinner and so on and so on. I can't do all these things at the same time, just as I can't read Crime and Punishment, view the railway bridge over Montmajour, over Avenue Montmajour, and I can't do all of that while I watch My Dinner with Andre, to take a film at random, at the same time, right? I can't have all these experiences at the same time. Each one is kind of its own universe, a universe unto itself. You could, of course, you could make the attempt to experience all of these things simultaneously, but I think in the ensuing mashup, you'd almost certainly miss out on each one's distinctive sense of life or primary emotional quality. So to the extent that the artwork is successful, the parts of the artwork are related through their participation in a certain quality. The pervasive quality of a work is hard to name, just as the pervasive quality of a practical situation is hard to name. It's, I've mentioned various feeling words, heartbroken, right? Heartbrokenness. But, that just really points us towards something. It doesn't do a whole lot to make us feel that feeling. And feelings are really hard to talk about. I've mentioned that in other videos as well. Maybe a topic for another day. So we can kind of point to the quality with emotion words like, again, heartbrokenness. One of my favorites is Weltschmerz, German word, kind of like world weariness or existential angst, something like that. Maybe things like, we could point to a work having a kind of defensive sarcasm or bitter humor or cautious optimism, maybe, or even romantic ecstasy. So we point to the quality of work with these, to the quality of a work with these kind of somewhat vague feeling words. So I want to be clear again about emotion. So I've used the word emotion But quality in this sense is more than what we usually think of as an emotion. For example, in playing a game. So thinking of some different situations. So a situation of gaming. In playing a game, you might feel various emotions. In that situation, you might have different emotions. It's not going to be just one emotion, the whole episode, right? The whole um, situation of gaming. You might feel some frustration. You might feel some elation. You might have delight at certain things. You might even feel bored at certain times. But these are actually component parts of a broader whole, which is, I think, much more difficult to describe. We can kind of point to these particular emotions using emotion as a many word. We can point to, oh, now I'm feeling angry. Now I'm feeling bored. Now I'm feeling happy. Now I'm feeling excited. Now I'm feeling frustrated, and on and on. Um, but these are all parts of a broader underlying whole, I think. And similarly, in listening to a sonata, just to choose a longer kind of composition, or reading a novel, you might pass through various emotions. So bringing it back to art. So you might experience different emotions at one level when you're experiencing a piece of art, a composition. Yet in a really good work of art, there seems to be some deeper feeling underlying these more ephemeral emotions. And Dewey sometimes calls this underlying feeling the primary emotion. He says, as an experience progresses, as an experience progresses, secondary emotions are evolved as variations of the underlying primary one. So I talked about all these various emotions you might have in a situation, and he says these are evolved out of a more basic underlying primary emotion. And here we see maybe the difference more clearly between emotion as a relationship word and emotion as a many word. So emotion as a relationship word, got primary emotion, the underlying foundational emotion of a situation, of a artistic experience or an aesthetic experience. Then you might have various other emotions kind of evolving, arising, developing out of that. These secondary emotions as a many word. You have many of them in one situation. And this is why I earlier talked about primary tertiary qualities and secondary tertiary qualities, meaning primary emotions and secondary emotions. Turn my pages of notes here. So to go back to this example of gaming or experiencing, well, anything. So for playing a game, reading a novel, designing a house, any of these, they will, if it's a coherent experience, have an underlying emotional tone. Yet, at any given moment, a specific emotional peak may rise out of this. These secondary emotions rise out, like frustration, boredom, elation, doubt, delight, whatever they are. But it seems to me that these secondary emotions take their specific qualities from the context of the underlying primary emotion. So you could say that frustration in playing a game is maybe not qualitatively the same as frustration when we're struggling to meet a deadline at work or at school. We use the same word, frustration, maybe. But words, cover many different things that are similar in some way, but not exactly the same. And I think that's true of emotions too. The specific quality of the frustration that we have is different in different situations where we might be frustrated. So I want to go on to look at a couple of other people, although this has already been maybe a bit long, but I do want to mention a couple of other people who have talked about quality. So I mentioned others besides Dewey who have noticed this phenomenon, this kind of pervasive quality in art. So Susanne Langer, she was somewhat influenced by Dewey. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But she's discussed quality in this way. So it is quality, she says. It is quality above all that pervades a work of art and is the resultant of all its virtual tensions and resolutions, its motion or stillness, its format, its palette, or in music, its pace, and every other created element. So again, pervades a work of art, the resultant of all its tensions and resolutions, motion, stillness, format, all those different things that come into it depending on the artistic medium. This quality is the projected feeling. It's projected out, it kind of sticks out in a sense of the artwork. Artists refer to it as the feeling of the work as often as they call it quality. And in fact, Langer says, somewhat later, the sole artistic intent is to present his idea of some mode of feeling in the nameless but sensible quality which shall pervade his nascent creation. So the artist's goal, basic goal, the soul, the only artistic intent, she says, is to present their particular sense of feeling, this nameless but sensible quality, which ought to pervade the artistic creation. John Middleton Murry, another influence on Langer actually, referred to this nameless but sensible quality as the coherent emotional nucleus. He also explained this using Baudelaire's term, the deep significance of life. And he says, this deep significance is the emotional quality, which is the common element in the objects and incidents which have habitually made the most precise and profound impression on the poet's mind. A quality that is in part the creation of the poet himself, but in part also a real attribute of the existing world, which needs the sensitiveness of the creative writer in order to be discerned. So the common element in the poet's experience, or the writer's experience, the common element in all those objects and incidents, which have had a profound impact on the poet's sense of experience. He says mind, maybe you can say sense of life, sense of experience. And this is partly the creation of the poet and also part of the world. That's why these are sometimes called tertiary quality. It's not just in the person. When we say emotion, we tend to think it's just in the person. If we call it a quality, it's part of the world, right? It's part of the situation. It's not just something about us in the way that we also think color is not we think color is out there in the world. Of course, it's also in us. It's transactional. So it's both in the world, it requires the world, and also a certain kind of organism, likewise with tertiary qualities. They're objective parts of the situation, but also subjective. So Murray says that where the writer is a completely free agent, the elements of the composition, such as plot, will be absolutely in harmony with this quality. When the writer is not, in other words, when the writer is not tightly bound by social conventions, she'll have the flexibility to harmonize all the elements with the special quality of the writers of her experience. The incidents depicted in the work, to use Murray's words, everything within the work, the incidents, the objects, will be, as it were, saturated with the quality of life which the writer discerns. Its various parts and characters will be of such a nature that the writer's accumulation of emotional experience will be able to form itself about them like crystals about a string dipped into a saturated solution. The metaphor here, I think, is a little confusing with this string dipped into solution and then forming crystals around it. But the point is that the writer's quality of life or accumulation of emotional experience saturates in ideal experience circumstances and ideal circumstances. This emotional experience saturates the diverse elements of the narrative, giving these elements what we've been calling qualitative binding. And an important function of the critic. Critics have a role here too, as Dewey also discusses, and I think Langer discusses, and Middleton Murry, John Murray, let's call him Murray to simplify things, as Murray also discusses. So an important function of the critic is to get to an awareness of this pervasive quality of life, to let herself or himself become saturated with the poet's mode of experience. You experience that mode of experience. This is why Langer sometimes talks about virtual experience. You're experiencing the way someone else experiences. And the critic needs to find ways of removing some of the obstacles that stand in the way of an immediate contact between this quality and the reader's mind. I think in other places I've talked about the critic as a kind of midwife. I forget who said this, someone, sorry. But the critic is a kind of midwife, removing obstacles between the reader and the work, kind of helping the reader come to experience in the best way possible the work of art. The critic, in other words, may not be able to define the essential quality of the author, but the critic can find ways of pointing in its direction, using words, of course, which would include kind of foreclosing false or unprofitable pathways into the artwork. So final point here, or final section, artists sometimes act as their own critics, which can sometimes be helpful and sometimes maybe not so helpful. But I want to look at the case of Richard Wright, who I think has been more helpful than not in acting as his own critic. Wright's novels tend to be rough around the edges. Maybe that's one of the lovable things about him, I don't know. But his novels, I think, do tend to be rough around the edges, but I think are, by and large, successful in terms of qualitative binding. Wright was explicitly aware of the issue of qualitative binding, and he discussed it pretty eloquently, I think, in his essay, Memories of My Grandmother. This essay is actually an analysis of what he was trying to do in his short novel, The Man Who Lived Underground. This was actually published recently. It was written around 1940, and it was published before recently as a short story in one of his short story collections. And then the longer manuscript was published, I think, just within the last few years. Anyway, Wright was aware when he was writing this, this book, Wright was aware of trying to create something unified, and unified by equality. He expressed this in terms of a ruling idea feeling, which he compares to the rhythmic beat of the bass in a jazz song. There's another nice metaphor for getting at this idea. Think of how the bass functions in popular music and in jazz. It's kind of this unifying thing, which we're not always even aware of it. We're probably more aware of it in jazz. Well, whatever. Not always aware of the bass, but it's an important unification element. Anyway, about his experience writing this novel, Wright wrote in Memories of My Grandmother, he wrote that, in the act of writing for the first time in my life, I reacted as a whole to the material before me in an effort to create a simple but meaningful surface of prose. What I mean is this. In all of my other attempts at writing, I felt that I was reacting in terms of many partial, limited, and incomplete concepts. But here, in this book, there is only one expressed in many terms and seen from many points of view, but still one far-reaching, complex, ruling idea feeling hovering in the background. So again, there is only one far-reaching, complex, ruling idea feeling hovering in the background, like the rhythmic beat of the bass in a jazz song, fusing and lending unity and meaning to the images and symbols and movements within the story. So here we see a good example of the difference between many concepts and relationship concepts. Remember this distinction we were making between one, many, and relationship words. The ruling idea feeling that Wright is talking about here, this is a relationship concept. It points to that which, as he says, hovers in the background, fusing and lending unity to the elements of the story. And what is the ruling idea feeling in this case? It's guilt, as in so many of Wright's novels. The novel begins, as Richard Wright describes it, the novel begins with a nice, honest Christian Negro boy walking along a street, going home to his wife who is about to give birth. He is picked up by the police, beaten, tortured, and charged with a horrible crime, which he did not commit. So that's the beginning of the story and where this idea. So it starts right away with this idea of guilt, this ruling idea of guilt. You're guilty. Although the protagonist, Fred Daniels, is not literally guilty. He's not, in fact, guilty of the specific crime he's accused of. But it's this feeling of being accused, of accusedness, of being assumed guilty by other people, of being separated from life through guilt, through accusation, which becomes the qualitative glue of the novel. Wright explains that the guilt theme served as the steady beat upon which I proceeded to improvise as freely and recklessly as I wanted, all of the images and symbols that my mind could conceive. I had the feeling while writing that anything that happened to come into my mind would fit. No matter how seemingly alien the items were, I could push them into this new frame of mind and give them a meaning which they did not otherwise have. Right? They gave him a unifying frame, a unifying feeling or quality that could kind of take up anything and unify it. He goes on, all of the images and symbols in the book are but improvisations upon this underlying steady beat in the bass, just like a jazz player improvising when he is playing his trumpet. So having that unifying principle allowed him freedom in improvising, right? Who was it earlier that we've heard other similar things earlier, right? I can't think of specifically which quote I was recalling there, but we've heard similar things where it's this unifying idea that allows these disparate elements. We've seen that in basically everyone that I mentioned. Takes these unifying elements and fuses them. Takes these disparate and varied elements and fuses them together. And that allows you a kind of confidence, I think, as a writer or as a artist. Once you find that unifying quality, that can be the hardest thing. And then almost anything, you can use almost any materials after that. No, in fact, this theme of accusation and guilt, which leads to a psychological and social break, is the theme of nearly all of Wright's novels. Just worth pointing this out, that he had a kind of, Middleton Murry, John Middleton Murry, pointed out the relationship with the artist's life, that they develop a kind of way of experience a mode of experience that becomes kind of their distinctive experiential quality that they then put into their art. And that's definitely true with someone like Wright. I mean, he taught in this same essay, he talks about these formative experiences where he was accused of things that he wasn't guilty of. There's a couple of really important episodes that he talks about. These are also talked about in his autobiographies. So it's really striking then that pretty much all the major works that he wrote also have this theme, this underlying theme of guilt, of false accusation, but nonetheless, you feel guilty for something you didn't do. So in one way or another, all of Wright's major protagonists find themselves forced into crime and out of society. Of course, Wright didn't really go into crime, went into something worse, maybe literary novels, writing literary novels, which is its own kind of, in some ways, anti-cultural activity, at least the way that Wright did it. But looking at his characters, you've got Bigger Thomas in Native Son, Cross Damon in The Outsider, Erskine Fowler in Savage Holiday, Fishbelly in The Long Dream. Guilty characters, sometimes actually guilty, sometimes innocent, sometimes a mix, right? They're often kind of a mix in a certain sense. An interesting, just kind of an interesting parallel to The Man Who Lived Underground is Savage Holiday, where the protagonist is actually innocent until the very end when he becomes a criminal, but he's worried that he's obsessed with the possibility that people think he committed this horrible crime, which he didn't actually commit. Anyway, so you see this theme throughout Wright's major works. The Man Who Lived Underground stands out maybe for distilling this theme into its purest form. Although I think Savage Holiday, although it's not a book that a lot of people like, I think it's also very focused. Some of his works can be more kind of discursive and a little bit digressive and not so unified. I think The Man Who Lived Underground is very, distills really this theme into its most potent form. Maybe again, also Savage Holiday. Everything is brought together under the aspect of accusation and guilt. The accusation forces Fred Daniels into isolation from society and into a new kind of understanding of life. And you see that, again, in all these novels where the characters, either through actual crimes or kind of potential imagined crimes, get forced out of their kind of regular lives and are forced into new situations where they have to see things in a new way. They gain a kind of new realization about the nature of existence. This is very existential also. The Man Who Lived Underground is a bit rough. It's not a perfect novel. This is understandable. I feel like I should mention this, but I do recommend you read it. Its roughness is understandable. It was never published during Wright's lifetime, after all, and so it never went through kind of that final polishing that normally a novel would go through with a major publisher, at least. But Wright's own analysis of his writing is a good illustration of how the creation of an artwork could be, maybe should be, guided by a certain quality, an emotional tone or idea feeling, and this quality forms the basis of unity for the work of art that is The Man Who Lived Underground. The forms and materials used in the artwork may be as varied, in any artwork may be as varied and discontinuous as you please, but if it's to hang together as an artwork, as a piece of music, as a painting, as a poem, all the materials should be suffused by or saturated with this dominant quality. By way of summary, let's review Let's review the different relational terms we've been using to try to get at the unifying element of an artwork. And also just kind of review this difference between many words and relationship words, and of course one words, but we'll set that to the side for a moment. So we've talked about primary, secondary, and tertiary qualities, and tertiary qualities can be many words or they can be relationship words. Maybe others can be too, but we're focusing on these tertiary qualities. So you can pick out emotions in your experience, but you can also talk about tertiary quality as a relationship, as the unifying mood of a situation, the unifying underlying emotion, primary emotion, as Dewey said. Murray talked about this as the coherent emotional nucleus of a work of art. He was talking about literature. And then Richard Wright talked about this as the ruling idea feeling. So these are all different ways of pointing to the same phenomenon, that experience comes to us with a kind of unifying quality. Artists are generally sensitive to that underlying quality and try to bring out its specificness in their works of art, the specificity of their qualitative experience. They try to convey that in their art, have us experience it as viewers, readers. A final note, there is a certain challenge in applying this theory to, I think, larger scale artworks. Does it apply to a symphony? Does it apply to a song cycle? Does it apply to like a multi-volume work? I've talked about Ralph Ellison's unfinished novel, which comes in different books, different parts, which are sometimes very different. Is there a single underlying quality, or can one unify these sorts of longer works in terms of related qualities rather than in terms of a single quality? Should we be looking at, if we're talking about, the movements of a symphony or the books in a multi-volume novel, should we be looking for maybe distinct qualities? Maybe each book has its own underlying quality, and maybe there's something of a relation between the underlying quality of each book, maybe, or each section. And, so now we're talking about, we're moving from talking about tertiary quality as a relationship word back to tertiary quality as a many word, and then maybe again back to tertiary quality as a relationship word. Maybe there is something, maybe we will discover something that goes throughout maybe all the sections of a very long work, all the books of a very long work, all the movements of a very long composition, and so on. I don't know. These are interesting questions to me. I don't know the answer. But in subsequent videos, essays, and things like that, I'm going to look in more specific detail at novels that feel to me qualitatively unified. Consider this a kind of experiential or qualitative criticism or analysis. I want to know why some novels are capable of producing strong qualitative experiences where others are not. I do feel that qualitative binding, as we've been calling it, is one of the things, perhaps the main thing, that separates great novels, at least great, shorter, medium-ish novels, from mediocre and even good novels. Qualitative binding. So look out for more forays into experiential criticism coming soon. And I'm sure I have exhausted your attention, so thank you for listening. And that is all for now. Thank you.